information on prevention, tools for a healthy lifestyle. Make little changes to be the best you. It's all here. A podcast empowering, informing, and motivating Bermuda to live well. Bermuda Health-Abets. Everything from A to Z on healthy living. Brought to you by the Health Promotion and Wellness Office of the Department of Health in collaboration with local health partners.
Welcome to an episode of Bermuda Health-Abets, a podcast where we discuss everything from A to Z on healthy living with a mission of empowering, informing, and motivating Bermuda residents to live well. I am your host today, Yosifia Spence. I'm the public health educator with the Health Promotion and Wellness Office at the Department of Health. One fun fact, I want to learn how to play tennis. I just need to actually get in there and do it. So I want to welcome our audience and I want to welcome our guests today. We have three of our occupational therapists from the Department of Health. We have Chanel, Patrice, and Teresa. Can you please introduce yourselves and just give a quick background about yourself and one fun fact or interesting tidbit about yourself? Go ahead.
I'll go ahead and start. So my name is Teresa Woolridge. I'm an occupational therapist with over 25 years of experience. One fun fact for me is that I'm not only an occupational therapist, but I'm also the mom of a preemie baby, which brings me into pediatrics. He is an adult now, but okay. I'm still a mom of a preemie baby, which gives me a lot of insight onto being empathetic to parents that are of preemie babies.
And you're the program manager or coordinator for?
I am the program coordinator for occupational therapy and physiotherapy services in Bermuda.
Oh, thank you so much. Patrice?
Hello, everybody. My name is Patrice Brown. I'm an occupational therapist. I had to do some math just now. I've been an occupational therapist for about 18 years now.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't seem like it's been that long. I love being an OT. So one interesting thing about me, I was the only person in my class in graduate school that did not want to work with children.
But now you work with children.
Now I work with children. So at the time, I felt like working with children who had challenges and who were ill and so on would make me feel sad. But in fact, the exact opposite is true. I love it. It's invigorating and it's very inspiring to work with children.
Oh, wow.
And my favorite color is purple.
I know that about you. And I remember when I first started, we used to share a desk.
Yes.
Remember?
Yes.
Well, it was your desk. And then I ended up coming in and sharing a desk with you.
Yes.
Chanel?
Yes. Hi, my name is Chanel Challinor, and I am an occupational therapist as well. Like Patrice, I had to do the math. It's been 16 years, and it's been 16 lovely years of my life. And like Patrice, I knew I wanted to work with children from the get-go. So I formed my career to do just that, and I have done just that. One fun fact about me, I'm newish to Bermuda, but I love to paddleboard. I haven't yet done it in Bermuda yet. But yes, I love paddleboarding.
That's interesting. I actually learned about paddleboarding like years ago when I first came, and I was like, so you don't go in the water?
Wow. If you're good, you shouldn't. You go on in the water.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I want to thank you for coming on to talk to us today. So our topic today is From Play to Progress, Understanding Early Childhood Development, Their Needs, Helpful Tips, and Community Resources. So we want to focus on our young people today and early child development. So if we could just get into our discussion, what exactly does an OT do when working with young children?
Sure. Okay. When people hear occupational therapist, sometimes they think that we help with people's jobs or occupations in the adult sense. But for children, the occupation is being a kid. That means playing, learning, moving, and taking care of basic skills. In pediatric OT, we work on the everyday activities that children need for development and independence. This can include things like learning to crawl, hold a bottle, use a crayon, or tolerate different textures. We also address fine motor skills like using hands and fingers, gross motor skills like crawling and balance, visual motor skills for catching a ball or writing, and self-care skills as well, like feeding or dressing.
So occupation really is just what you do every day in terms of getting on in life or like regular routines. How do you manage? Kind of, is that what you would say occupation really is? Because I agree. You said a work, and people usually think straight to work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what everyone is doing every day, all day. Like, what are you doing in your everyday life that contributes to your well-being, right?
Absolutely.
So you talked about child development. How early can signs of developmental delays or challenges start to show in young children?
So we can actually start to see hints of developmental differences surprisingly early, sometimes as young as 6 months. But every child grows at their own pace. But there are certain benchmarks that we should expect. By around 6 months, most babies are rolling and starting to sit with support. So if a baby has very low muscle tone or extreme stiffness that prevents those movements, that might be a signal of a motor delay. Even something like not bringing both hands together to play with a toy. That could be a subtle red flag for a possible neurological issue. For instance, a child may favor one side. That could hint to a weakness on the other side. So it's things like that we look for.
Okay, but you like that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's happening to the child.
Not.
It's just that those are things that might indicate.
Red flags,
okay, because we don't want parents to start like, oh my gosh, they didn't use the left hand. Let me go to the occupational therapy. We don't want parents to panic. But I understand where you're coming from with that.
I think one of the key things is to understand that every child is unique and they develop at their own pace. So even though you may not see something, that doesn't always mean that something is
that's
wrong.
the case.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are some key developmental milestones parents should be aware of in the first 5 years? I know you talked about like some 6-month expectations, but like what about through that first 5 years of life?
Okay, so I'm gonna try it's quite a lot of things that you can look at as developmental milestones. So by 3 to 4 months, babies should reliably turn towards sounds, watch faces, and follow things with their eyes. By 6 months, like I said, they should be sitting up with a little support around that time, and they're at that time they're usually rolling both ways by now.
Okay.
From a fine motor standpoint, a 6-month-old can reach for objects and transfer a toy from one hand to the other. And then if you go on to 9 months, a lot of babies are pulling up to stand at furniture. Crawling typically happens by 9 months. You can also see children with a pincer grasp, and that's just using your thumb and pointer finger to pick up little bits of foods. By 12 months, a huge milestone here is first steps, but like I said before, every child has a different pace. So there's a range that goes up to 18 months. So if you see a child walking by 18 months, that's fine. If it's after 18 months, then you might want to just speak to your pediatrician or a developmental specialist like occupational therapy or physiotherapy is usually where they go when it comes to walking, and get some support with that, or get some direction or feedback on what's going on there. Just a few more things. By 3 months, you should see more coordination. A 3-year-old can pedal a tricycle and jump with both feet. From a fine motor standpoint, they may be able to
I'm sorry, you said 3 months, you meant 3 years?
3 years. I apologize. 3 years.
No, I just wanted to make sure. I was like a 3-month-old pedaling a bike. My goodness. I mean, they're like running out
Thank
here.
you for that correction, because that's very important. So it's 3 years old. They should be pedaling. They should be pedaling a bike. And from a fine motor standpoint, simply circling, copying or making circles on a lined paper. They should be able to do.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much for that. I think there are a lot of things in there that I did not think about when my daughter was small. I think those things just kind of happened, and I didn't necessarily think about even the whole thing with the thumb and the index finger. Like, never.
The pincer grasp. Yes.
Yeah, the pincer grasp. That's what you call it?
Pincer grasp.
Pincer.
Yes.
Pincer grasp. Oh, that's cool. So, how can parents distinguish, though, between a child developing at their own pace versus showing signs of delay? Because I know you talked about, sometimes children could develop at their own pace. Like, one size doesn't always fit all, right? What are some of those signs that can indicate that's not them just going at their normal pace?
Yeah, so following on from what Teresa would have said, what to look out for, bearing in mind then these are the things you look out for, then, if they're not doing certain things at the recommended age, then it's not, then there may be some issues. Just last week in the office, we were talking about parents saying they have good babies, quote unquote, and like, what is good?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And they typically, and that could be subjective or objective, but typically when parents say they have a good baby, they mean the baby doesn't cry. They are just they don't give any trouble. They probably sleep well. But actually, we want a baby to be alert. We want them to be interacting, to be looking at you, to be imitating, to be copying what you do, and like to give a response for every action you give. And I know there is I forget the term now that psychologists use. Oh, serve and return, right?
Okay.
And that's sort of like the interaction, like we are serving and returning. You're asking us questions, we're answering.
Right.
And for babies and toddlers, when you serve or you play with them, then they should be giving you some response back.
Like a facial expression or a laugh or a smile or something like that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And depending on their developmental age. So, like your babies, when you coo or you smile at them, they should smile back. And with your toddlers, or just sort of slightly before, when you like call a word or something, they should be trying to imitate that
word or repeating it or something like that. Okay.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So I know we said we don't want to like panic and think like every single thing is a delay or something like that. So what are some absolute red flags that you would recommend parents do not ignore?
Right. So again, that comes down to an age, and it's so important that basically you keep your pediatrician appointments, because if they're not known to occupational therapy or physiotherapy or speech therapy, then a parent might not necessarily know what's going on. So we work with the pediatricians, and they know, if there's a problem, they can refer them to us.
They might recognize it as well.
Yeah. So I would say, and it's just sort of based on actually what Teresa said about the milestones and what to look out for. So if they're not doing those things, like if they're not rolling by 6 months or tummy time, so on their tummies, if they're not tolerating it at all, then we know there's a problem, because that's quite important then to move on to other developmental skills.
Is the tummy time like significant for the rolling piece or something? Because I hear people talk about tummy time all the time, and I'm like, okay. And even when my daughter was small, I don't recall if or how often I did do tummy time. No judgment here, y'all. Don't judge me. But but I'm just saying that because like that's something you often hear like moms with little small babies talking about tummy time. Is that significant to like the turn-in piece?
It is, and I think not just only the turn-in, because it is preparing the child for going on their like
Their hands and pushing themselves
and pushing up, and then that leads into
Oh.
crawling. Like I'm having a child at the moment, and it's actually two of them, and one of them loves it, the other one does not. I mean, literally, when you put them on their tummy, like
They're
crying,
upset.
and then when you take them up, quiet. And so we need children to be not only tummy time, because different positions as well, because it's important for their development.
Okay, thank you for that. So,
And I can add,
go ahead.
in terms of school-age children, which is the age group that I work with, a lot of the red flags we get come from not just parents, they also come from the teachers.
Okay.
So some of the things we might look at in terms of a red flag is a school age child, like say 4 or 5, are they refusing to do any hand skill activities? Are they refusing to color and write? Are they only using one hand to do an activity that requires 2 hands? Are they very klutzy? Are they able to sit upright in their chair? Those sorts of things.
Okay, that's really helpful. I think as well, I guess, because I asked what a red flags parents could look at. So even in thinking about like those who spend so much time with them, like teachers or even like other loved ones, and just saying, okay, just kind of pay attention. Basically, we need to pay attention, right? And seeing what's going on with our young people.
Yes.
Wow.
If I can also add that I did allude to earlier about not walking by 18 months. That is a red flag, and usually the physiotherapist will get involved with that. But also extreme sensory reactions that are beyond what you would typically expect. So if a child is having a meltdown because of sounds, or if they are feeling textures and they respond like very extremely or start screaming or carrying a tantrum, then sometimes that can be a red flag as well. And then one of the more important red flags is any loss of previously acquired skills. So if a child was able to walk before but not able to walk now, or they're able to use their fine motor skills like buttoning up and whatnot, and if they are no longer able to do that, then those are serious red flags as well.
Oh, thank you for that. I appreciate you adding that. And so since we're talking about sensory thing, when it relates to sensory processing, can you explain what sensory processing is and why it's so important in early development?
Sure. So basically, sensory processing is the way in which your brain uses the sensations in order to create a meaningful or an appropriate response. So you have external sensors that you get information from the environment, such as your hearing, vision, touch, taste, and smell. But what many people don't know is you also have internal sensors, like are you hungry?
Okay.
What is your sense of balance like? Where is your arm in space? So sensory processing is using a combination of those sensations
Right.
in order to, participate in activities that are important for you to do.
Okay. That's interesting. And so what are some signs that a child might be struggling with sensory processing?
Yes. So, Teresa, again, she spoke about the sounds. If
Right.
a child has an overreaction to sounds, textures, so they may not like wearing certain clothes, the feel of certain things, but also, and I spoke about movement as well, if they are not, because kids are, their primary occupation is play. Right?
Yes.
And that's how they learn. And play involves not just sedentary play, but active and moving play. And if they are not wanting to go down the slide or use the swing, so like they're almost like scared of certain types of movement,
Right.
and exploring their environment, because that's another way through play, they explore their environment. So if they're, and we all have different sensory tolerances
yes.
and sensory profiles. So we're speaking like within that, like with outside of the range, the normal range.
Right.
Yes.
Like in terms of what that reaction might be
Yes.
to those experiences or something like
an
that.
overreaction. Yes.
Because I know with small kids, like a lot of times the simplest form of seeing that is like with certain foods, you know, and for me, like even as an adult, I'm not necessarily into custards and smooth things like that, but I love like blueberries and raspberries, and I want to be able to feel the seeds, you know. I'm not a lemon meringue gal type of pie, but I like an apple pie, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So I think that you see those sort of things, but you know, I've never experienced like looking at those, what an extreme case might look like if someone is experiencing that, you know, the sensory processing issues.
And it could,
wow.
Yeah, it could be a gag, or they like throw up. So that
Okay.
overreaction to that. And a speech therapist, just picking up on one thing you just said, a speech therapist once told me you have to expose a child, like when weaning, to a food at least 12 to 14 times before you can say, well, they don't like it. Do you know what I mean?
Okay.
You can't just like give them what, oh, they don't like, because they're not, it's new to them, right?
Right.
So they have to sort of acclimatize their taste buds.
I'm laughing because the first time I had pizza, I said I didn't like it. So it's a kind of
Okay.
that was before I had even tasted it. So it's kind of the same idea.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not a huge pizza fan, you know, but I think that's like, I'm picky. My crust needs to be a certain flavor, a certain texture, not too thick, not too thin. Yeah, you know, I got issues, y'all.
And that is your preference, right? But
Right.
you're not gonna, if you're hungry, you're not gonna be like, well,
I'm not going to eat that because it might make me throw up or something
you're
like
still
that.
gonna eat it because you're hungry, right? But a child who has a sensory difference would not, like, would go hungry before they
Really,
touch it.
and I would definitely see that as a concern as a parent, but even as a
Absolutely.
teacher, right, in nursery and like kindergarten, and because this is the age group we're talking about, right? That's something that they would recognize. Okay, they're not eating any of the food that you're sending to school, right? So that's a concern.
So I think from a sensory perspective, we can look at how we're sitting here right now, and our brains can filter out the sound of the lights. Sometimes you can hear the lights or a fan or the smell of coffee. All these things our brains are filtering.
Right.
With a child that has sensory issues, they're not able to do that at all because they're
Okay.
not able to take in that information. Sometimes it can be painful, so it disturbs their function. So when it
Okay.
disturbs your function, that's when it's an
It's
issue.
an issue.
All of us have preference. Like, I don't like the feel of this tag on the back of my shirt, but
Right.
I can sit here and still do this interview. But some children, or even adults for that matter, they cannot. They absolutely will have a meltdown. They getting their hair cut is a huge deal for them. So it's things like that. When it disturbs your function, that's when it becomes a real issue.
Very interesting. So, how can parents support a child with sensory sensitivities at home?
Right. So, just breaking it down, because Patrice talked about the sensory processing, and we have 8 senses. So it just depends on what senses you're talking about. But I would say, like, let me think. So if I take, for example, well, if it's food, I would say consult occupational therapy and speech therapy together, because we would work with that and we would give advice on that, because every child is different. In sensory, we have a slogan, we feed the need, right? Because if there is a sensory difference, a child is seeking something or they're avoiding something, they need it, but in the correct dose. So I feel like that's quite a broad question, and it would depend on really
The
what
child that you're dealing with.
Absolutely. And I think if you suspect that your child does have a sensory processing difficulties, you do want to see your pediatrician to get a referral to our services.
Okay.
So we can consult specifically on that.
Yeah. No, I understand that. I think within anything like that, right? People are very unique. You can talk about broad kind of things that are related to what expectations are, but when it comes down to any sort of treatment, I think that is basically client centered as to what their needs are, and then you look at, obviously you probably assess and look at what those specific needs are for that baby or whoever your client is. But today we're talking about children under 5, right?
Yeah, and I just think, just as I was thinking further on that question, as a parent, you need to be adaptable to what advice you get, because ultimately it's going to be incorporated into your lifestyle, into your child's lifestyle, into your lifestyle and routine. So just be flexible and adaptable.
That's really good advice. When we talked about play basically being actually before I say that, you said 8 senses.
Oh,
what are those 8 senses, please and thank you?
Yes, we have 8 senses. So the 3 that people might not know about is interoception. So that's the receptors of your organs, like am I hungry, that sort of thing. You have proprioception. So basically that's knowing where is your in in space. So where are my hands, like knowing where to put your limbs so that you can do what you need to do during the day. And then it's your vestibular sense, or basically your sense of balance. Okay. So those are the extra 3.
Okay, because I was like, it's because we got smell, we got taste, we got sight. What did I miss? Touch and
Taste.
Sound, right?
Yes.
And I'm not gonna be able to pronounce those other words, but I thought that was really cool because we all think about the basic, 5 senses, but there is so much more. Wow, new information. So earlier we talked about play being, the main occupation for children. So when it comes to play and learning, how does play contribute to a child's development from an occupational therapist perspective?
So one of the things I love about being an OT and a children's OT is that I get to play. I get paid to play, should I say, along with writing reports and all that admin stuff. But primarily, we get paid to play, and our treatment is through play because that's what children understand. That's how they respond, because we want them to engage in therapy. We want the best results for them. And ultimately, regardless of outside of therapy, just normal development, that's how children learn. They explore, they play, they learn through play. So if you think of, I know Teresa or Patrice was talking about a child bringing their hands to midline, right? And when we say, I say midline, the middle of their body, that we need to know. So your brain, you have 2 sides of your brain. And when we say midline, it's the middle of the 2 sides of your brain. And your brain works, we need both sides of our brains working, because that's how we are coordinated. And so, so we need children to be able to bring their hands to midline to feed themselves, not only to play. That's how they feed themselves. A baby feeds themselves with a bottle. And I know Patrice will go on to talk about school, so I will not.
Patrice, did you want to add something to that?
Okay, sure. So there are a lot of different things that children can develop and improve on when they play that we might not necessarily think about. Like, for example, they might work on their neck muscles to strengthen them so that they can hold their head up. Okay. They might work on their forearm control, their dexterity, their eye-hand coordination, using 2 hands together, as was mentioned, their eye tracking, all of those sorts of things you can develop through play. Okay. And in developing those skills through play, you also can carry those skills over to, can I pay attention in class? Okay. Can I use a pencil? Okay. Can I put my shoes on by myself? Yes. Those sorts of things.
Very interesting and important, I guess, as well, when you think about children being able to kind of develop into being more independent as they grow, right? Putting on their own shoes, you know?
Yes, I think we're going to talk about that later. But as occupational therapists, one of the main goals of our therapy is helping people to be as independent as possible in things that they want to do and things that they need to do.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, so we talked about play, right, and how important play is. Did you want to add something to that,
Yeah,
Teresa?
I was just going to say from an OT lens, and it's touching on what Chanel and Patrice said as well.
Right.
We often assess a child's developmental level through play. So how a child plays can tell us a lot about their sensory processing, their motor skills, their creativity, and their persistence. So if a child avoids certain play, then we know that possibly
might be a
there's something
challenge.
going on with that. So it's a lot that goes on with play. We sometimes are seen on the floor with the child playing, and so people looking in would say, "Well, that's not really work. What type?" But it's a lot going on. It's a lot of science behind that as well. There's a lot of research to support play and why it's so important, especially for children.
Right. So it's highly relevant. Just for our listeners, you know, you have to think about when you think about work, because you guys are saying, oh, we get paid to play, but it's so significant in terms of children developing into adults who can be independent, who can contribute to society, who can work, you know, in those jobs that they need to work in. So I think we also have to think about how relevant is what you're doing to the success of our society, right? Did you want to add something to that? You were going to add something to that, or you're okay?
I think I'm okay. But when Teresa was talking about the research, it's a really nice study out. I don't remember who did it, that a skill learned in play, you need less repetitions of it as, how does it go? You need less repetitions to learn a skill in play versus if you were just to do the skill outside of play. So that's another reason why play is so important for children.
That's interesting. So are there certain types of play or activities you would recommend to help with fine motor skills or gross motor skills? And before you answer that, what are fine motor skills versus gross motor skills? Like, what is the difference?
So I'll start with gross motor. So those are the big skills that our bigger muscles in our body will use. So crawling, standing, walking, running, and fine motor skills are the smaller, sort of more intrinsic muscles that we'll use, such as so holding a spoon.
Okay.
I'm thinking sort of in this sticking in my 0 to 5 bracket. Holding a spoon, holding a rattle, then like writing. Excuse me. And you asked about the activities that we would recommend for that.
Yes.
So it's funny because I think today, like our generation, like, so busy, right? Like parents, and like kids just need us to play with them. And sometimes when they can speak, they ask, "Can you play with me?" Right?
Yes.
And that is so important because children learn by what they see. They just can't make it up, you know? So they need a model. And so it's so important to play with your child. So I was on the ground this morning with a 6.5-month-old because if I sat up, they'd be looking up at me, which I don't want them to do. I want to be on their level. So like I was singing, I was playing with the rattles with them and the different toys and stacking, and they saw, the blocks fall, and I'm singing. And then, if your child's a few more months old and they're sitting and they can clap, you want to action songs for, like, when they can walk and run, I always say to parents, like, get outside in the fresh air, get to parks, you know, they're free, you know, and playing is free. It doesn't have to be something, an indoor jumping that you pay for. Like, you can jump, you can play a jump song, and sing and jump, because your child doesn't need so many toys. They need you to interact with them. Yes. And as Patrice said, the natural, and that's quite natural, as opposed to creating something that you have to pay for. And not that any paid for things are not great. They are great too. But, you know, just thinking about the socioeconomics, like everyone may not be able to afford to pay for something. So you don't have to. Some of my clients, like, I am so, like, surprised and pleased that, you know, they take on advice and they make it work, because you don't need, like, a lot of things, but you need to be present and participate in play.
Thank you so much. You gonna add to that?
Just a bit. I'm a big fan of active play versus sedentary play. With active play, children are challenged more. Right. Not to say that sedentary play, you should never do it.
Right.
But I find with a lot of the children that I work with, all they do is sedentary play, which doesn't help them to develop skills that they need in order to, you know, participate in school.
Right. So while we're on that note, because you're talking about sedentary play, and one topic that is, you know, very common right now in our current times, because the world is evolving, we're becoming more technological. Again, parents get busy and are not as indulged as they, you know, as you would want them to be, as you indicated earlier about, you know, helping children to develop those skills. But what we do a lot of times is we have like iPads and phones and all of these screens. How does screen time impact early childhood development?
Right. So yes, this is a hot topic, and it's
I know.
And me and another colleague had presented on this some time back, and let me just first say, if your child is 2 or under, they do not need to be looking at a screen. So let's talk about the over 2s, because I think that just, you know, like, it's just their brains cannot process it. It's just too much. And we talked about sensory processing. There's something called sensory overload.
Okay.
And they just cannot manage it. So, and, you know, guess what? Your child doesn't know what they don't know.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
So, as soon as you expose your child to something, it doesn't have to be screens. They know it, right? So then they, like, it's in their brain and they
recognize it.
Right.
Well, can I just ask you, because you said under 2.
Yes.
Like, I remember like having the little shows with the like naming things and the colors and thing when my daughter was a baby on the TV. So that's a no-no?
No, absolutely no. Guess what? Remember what I said? Be present with your child.
Right.
You can be that screen.
Okay.
And because they want to see your face, and I spoke about serve and return, right?
Right.
The TV tries to serve, but it's not serving, and your child cannot often
return for that,
right?
Okay.
They're just being served that all the time, so they're just being filled and just being too overwhelmed, so they do not need that. Like a simple under 2, a book, a rattle, like any of their toys, they will or should be able to happily sit for a few, tummy time for a few minutes.
So under 2, no screens recommended.
Absolutely.
I have to remember that for the potential future babies.
And
okay.
Yeah, and that is research. And I also wanted to say something, but I lost my train of thought. I apologize.
No, it's okay. You were talking about like, so over 2 in terms of how screen time impacts their development.
Yes.
Over 2, because we're saying no screens under 2.
Yes. No. Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm still processing that one.
And I remembered what I was gonna say. Like basically, because this has never happened before, like technology with this screen time, and the world right now is the experiment, you know?
Yes.
In 10 years' time, we will know some of the impacts that it has, not only on our children, but on our adult brains. I mean, some of the research they're discovering now, you know, but in a few years' time, like longer term studies. So just with screen time and early childhood. So then you're over twos. Like you really want to limit it. Like I remembered like when I was studying, because this is not a fun fact, this is a bad fact, because I am allergic. I am so not allergic. I am obsessed like with screen time. Like, and we all are, and I consciously need to limit myself because I get addicted, and it is addictive.
I agree.
We need to know that, and I think most people out there would agree. And most times you see people, they're looking down on their phones, like just adults, right? And we need to be looking forward because it impacts our posture as well.
Oh, wow.
So if you think about when your kids are in screens, like, so you're 2 to 5 year olds, when they're on a screen, they're probably slouched or they're hunched over. Very seldom are they on tummy time or propped up on their arms and looking at a screen. So you ultimately want to get them to explore their world, because they will have time for screen time all the other times. You know, like I would say if you're really, really in a, a tight spot, and you can't make that the very, very last resort, because as Patrice said, like that is not active learning. Like that is not. Yes.
Okay. No, thank you for that.
If I could just add to that one more thing about screen time. Not only should we monitor screen time of the child, but also the parent-child interaction. So when the parent is spending a lot of time on screen time, that's taking away time from the child as well, and the child sees that, so that's not only do the child we need to monitor, but also the parent.
Right, because you talked about like they're watching and they're mimicking, like, things as well. So that might look very normal. Did you want to add something to that, Patrice?
Yes, please. Just really quickly. So with the school age children that I work with, the children that have a lot of screen time, their social skills are not as good in terms of their ability to communicate with their friends and the adults around them. And also what I notice is their attention span is not as long, because with screens you get instant gratification. It's very quick. But school is not like that.
Yes,
you need to be able
slower
to pay attention for longer time periods. So that's another reason why, you really should minimize the amount of screen time that your children have.
Oh, thank you so much for that.
We might have already talked about this. I'm sorry. One other thing.
Go ahead.
Another impact is on physical activity, or rather the lack of it. So when you have more time when you spend more time on screen time, that takes away from that time when that child can be actually going outside and play and developing their gross motor and fine motor skills in a more natural way.
And you know what? And lower physical activity has other implications, as we know, right? Chanel did say this is a hot topic. Did you have one more thing to add to that, Chanel?
It really is. And I think, like we may have to dedicate something
specific to talking about screen time. I think we could definitely come back and have another conversation about that.
Yeah, because I could go on.
We could go on.
And you know what? And I think some parents and a lot of us, because this is a hot topic at the moment, that we might all want to have further conversation and explore a bit more, and like look at all of those specific implications behind it. Like you talked about our necks, Chanel. Yeah. Like I didn't think about, like, if I'm looking down at my screen, how that's impacting my posture. So I would be interested in a further deeper dive into that discussion around how does screen time impact us, because I think this is important as it contributes to the discourse that is out there, because I know there's ongoing research, right? Like you said, this is something that's relatively new for us within the last 20 something years, right? And so when you look at what research looks like and starting to actually see the impact of something on society, it takes a little longer sometimes to say, okay, how is this impacting us? Yes. Go ahead.
And I just thought, like, if you look at like first world countries such as Singapore and Korea and stuff, their children are not watching TV. They're learning. And if you're thinking about what society are you raising, like for Bermuda, in the next 30 years, what will the
What
adults
will it look like?
Yeah, look like then. So we want to have well-rounded adults, and you're not going to get that by screen time, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. We're definitely going to have to come back to that discussion in the future. So I know earlier you talked about how occupational therapists, the role that you might play when it comes to food-related issues or sensory issues, but what does sleep issues fall under your scope, and how do they tie into overall development of a child? Chanel, you're gonna answer this one?
I can. So sleep actually is quite intricate, and there's so many studies. We don't fully understand sleep because it's almost like you are dead, right? But because sleep is also an occupation, right? One of the things that children do, it would fall under our remit in the sense of, well, is your sleep impacting your function? So, sleep would impact a child's ability to focus and concentrate. And think about if you're sleepy. Like, if I don't get enough sleep, I am not a productive adult, And it's the same for children. So we want them to have a good sleep routine. So we focus on routines, because as an OT, I want to make parents and teachers' lives and caregivers' lives as easy as possible. So we want to be able to recommend things that will fit into their schedule, right, and into their routine. So, you make small tweaks. So your child needs a good bedtime routine. Like, children are supposed to be, between... Well, there's different ranges for hours of sleep, but they need to be getting up to 16 hours. Right?
Yes, I know. I read about that.
Yes.
Small children need a lot more sleep.
Because when you sleep, your brain, your body is healing and your body is also developing. So this is why babies need lots of sleep, because they're still developing. And sleep for adults, just a quick tip, is when our body heals and regenerates. So we really, sleep is just as important as breathing and eating. Yes.
Thank you for that. You talked about the importance of daily routines for young children. So that goes for eating and sleeping and just all of those things. Is it more related to the consistency of that routine, or?
Both. So I think having the routine, because routines are consistent, right? Routines and habits are automatic. So I have a routine. That's how I function. That's how I'm organized. And kids need, again, they don't just learn. We have to teach them. And so routines make habits, and habits make for, again, well-rounded children and adults. So I'm sure that you have a routine. That's how you get everything done, right?
Right, of course. Patrice or Teresa, did you want to add anything to how important daily routines are for young children?
Daily routines help children like to predictable things. So when you have that routine, that helps with that. But I just wanted to touch on the sleep as well.
Go ahead.
One of the things that we need to look, and I'm not sure if you've hit on this one, but the environment, looking at the environment that the child is sleeping in. Darkness is the best, is ideal, but if you need to have dim lights, and that's fine too. Some children, because of sensory issues, they may want a heavier blanket, but I would suggest that if you're going to use a weighted blanket, that it's somehow supervised. And you
that can be dangerous.
Yeah, it can be. If it's too heavy for the child, definitely get feedback from an occupational therapist to see what will work best for the child. So looking at the environment, some children sleep better with white noise in the background. So there's different things like that you want to be looking at from an environmental standpoint as well.
Go ahead, Patrice.
I have to go back to the screen time. So, if you are on a screen and then you try to fall asleep right away, it will be harder for you.
And that's relevant to sleep as well, right?
So cut it at least 2 hours before bedtime, and your child will have an easier time falling asleep.
Yes, and they even talk about the recommendations for adults, right, when we talk about getting quality sleep. Because, you can sleep, but the quality of that sleep might not help you feel rested and so on. So I'm glad that you brought that point up, Patrice. So when we talked about earlier, like parental involvement and the importance of that. What advice do you have for parents who are feeling overwhelmed or unsure about their child's development?
So first, I want to say to any parent listening, it's completely normal to feel overwhelmed at times. Parenthood doesn't come with a manual, and every child is different. So uncertainty is part of the journey. I've not only seen this in my I've seen this in my professional life, but also in my personal life as a mom too, especially when my child was born as a preemie. I've had many worries, so you're not alone. These feelings don't mean you're doing anything wrong.
Right.
In terms of advice, I would say trust your instincts, but also trust the process. So if you feel something might be off in your child's development, pay attention to that feeling. Your parents know the child best. Bring up any concerns with your pediatrician or a specialist. But at the same time, remember that development is a process with a lot of variability. Progress can be slow and steady, and that's okay.
Thank you for that. And so how can caregivers work together with occupational therapists to create a supportive environment at home? Chanel?
Yes. So, again, a slightly broad question because it just depends on what issues your child would have. And I'm going to go back to an answer I said earlier about being coachable and being flexible to the advice, because we and Teresa mentioned this, like trust your instincts. We actually ask parents a lot of questions like, okay, how does your child sleep? So we find out the information because we are seeing them. We're gonna get some information, but not all of it. So we also depend on parents, asking parents, their feedback on how the child is currently functioning. So, and then we tailor the advice to
that. Yes. Okay.
But I know we mentioned some of the things like with sleep, like make sure the environment is conducive. And I'm going to say with also when you're eating as well, mindfulness is a thing. And it was a thing before we just gave it a name.
Mindful
eating. Just focus. Do one thing at a time, because multitasking actually does not work. I was a big fan of it, but I had to, I read books and I'm like, it really doesn't. You can only do one thing well at a time. You know what I mean? And it doesn't save time. It actually does not save time. So you want to you want to take your time with your child, be present and engage with your child, because you will learn a lot. They're trying to communicate to you too, right? And they will tell you when something's wrong. But we need to be present and listening as parents and caregivers and as therapists too.
Thank you so much for that. I feel like we've already touched on this, but are there any simple things parents can do daily that really make a difference?
Yes. So we talked about independence earlier. So I would encourage parents and caregivers to give their children opportunities to practice skills and to do for themselves. That is the only way they're going to learn how to put on their socks and shoes themselves. If you always do it for them, they'll never learn.
I remember my daughter be like, I can do it. I'm doing it myself, mommy.
Yes.
So, yes. Thank you for that.
I think
Sorry,
also,
go ahead, Teresa.
I'm sorry. This might sound mundane, but also including your children in chores, helping them with chores. There's a lot of cognitive as well as sensory, as well as physical motor skills that are developed during the way. So just helping to sweep the floor, or if you're baking or cooking, helping them to do things in the kitchen. Supervision with cutting things, of course, but still including them in all aspects
in that process
of cooking and chores. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then that in turn creates responsible, well-rounded children, which creates responsible, well-rounded adults. So it starts from
Yes,
child,
from baby,
young.
from zero, right?
Absolutely.
So when should a parent consider getting an OT's evaluation? I know you talked about earlier, like, that's something, if you notice something, go to your pediatrician, right? And then also your pediatrician or your teachers might notice something. So when do you get involved?
So that's a good question. So again, we alluded to that a little bit earlier, spoke about this a little bit earlier. But if you notice significant delays in milestones, for example, if by 9 or 10 months your baby is enrolling or sitting, because usually that's around 6 months that you should be doing that. But significant delays in milestones, you want to ask your go to your pediatrician and seek out OT or PT referral for that, as well as any regression in skills. Definitely, that's a red flag, as we mentioned before. You want to do that as well. Behavior or sensory concerns. So any sensory responses that interrupt function. So if they're feeding routine, if they're not eating at all because of some sensory things like the feel of the food seems to be an issue with them, or the sounds in regular settings, if that's setting a child off, then those times you should seek out some support.
Thank you for that. Are there any common misconceptions about occupational therapists or child development you'd love to clear up? Because I think it's important for us to dispel myths that lead to us kind of having certain practices or doing things that might be unhelpful when it comes to our child's development.
Yes. One of the things I have heard the most, can you help me to get a job? That's one of the things I've heard the most.
Really?
Yes.
No way.
Because, yes, way. It's the occupation part of occupational therapy. I think that gets people.
That makes sense, I guess. If you like, in terms of like basic understanding of occupation, you might think that. Wow. Okay.
Yes, and another thing, like being pediatric OTs, that play is not.
It's not work.
Useful.
Right.
That's another misconception.
Obviously, from our robust, very interesting discussion today, we obviously can see like why it's so important. Play as a part of like especially our 0 to 5 year old stages, right?
Yes. Okay. So, do you have anything?
Any myths or?
Well, I was just going to say we are not physiotherapists. We're not physiotherapists.
Yes, and I think there's a distinct difference. And I'd love, again, like we said, to have a future conversation, even with our physiotherapist, about this developmental stage, right? Because that also might look different for our physiotherapist. And even earlier, you talked about what the collaboration looks like in terms of the eating aspect when it comes to those sensory processing things, and you're working with a speech language pathologist, right? So those, I think that it's also significant for us to recognize that within a lot of what we do in public health, or even just within medicine or health period, is collaborative, right? Because we do have to work together on a lot of things. So I like that you brought that up. So how can people access your services specifically, because you work for Department of Health? So how can people access y'all or get in contact, or how does that processing work?
Sure. So if listeners in Bermuda want to reach out and learn more, we are part of the Department of Health. You can contact us by calling the general line 278-4900. You can also email us at occupationalandphysiotherapy@gov.bm.
Thank you so much for that. I want to thank y'all so much for coming on. But before we go, is there one final piece or of information or quote or something important that you want to share? And you know what? You can all share a piece that if you would like with our Bermuda Health-Abetters, as I call them, our listeners before we go.
So I guess my top tip is to just play, be present and play with your child. And like we are all kids at heart, right? And not going off track, but going off track. But we also like, because our occupations as adults, our play occupations are like going to the gym or doing a sport or a hobby. So that's still play. We play and children need to play.
Yes. Thank you so much, Patrice.
I was going to say something similar. I would say, just have fun, be a kid with your child. That's what I would say.
Thank you. One last thing, Teresa.
Sure. Ditto for what Chanel and Patrice said as well. But as part of our training and why we're here is to make a difference in children's lives. So I think the core belief for me and for many therapists is that the earlier intervention, as early as we can get, can change lives. So there you go.
Thank you so much. So we've been talking about from play to progress, understanding early childhood development, their needs, helpful tips, and community resources. And I want to thank our very lovely guest for coming on today. This has been a really good discussion. I enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in to another episode of Bermuda Health-Abets. So if you want to find more episodes of Bermuda Health-Abets, you can go on to Department of Health's Facebook page, as well as our YouTube channel. You can like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that way you can get notifications for when our podcast or anything is coming out. If you have any questions that you're interested in having answered on Bermuda Health-Abets or any topics of suggestion, you can email healthpromotion@gov.bm. Again, that's healthpromotion@gov.bm. And let us know, what would you like to hear about? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Bermuda Health-Abets.
You have been listening to Bermuda Health-Abets. Please note, anything you heard on this podcast is not a substitute for visiting your healthcare provider. If you have a topic or want a question answered, please contact the Health Promotion and Wellness Office of the Department of Health by emailing healthpromotion@gov.bm or by calling 278-4900. Be sure to listen out for the next episode of Bermuda Health-Abets.